He symbolized, I think, in his short life, the conflicts of a genius mind sold out to sensuality that could not escape the contradictions of his philosophy. He, in his life, propagated a reality that espoused unbridled freedom. In his book of fiction, he bared his soul on the enslavement and pain of promiscuity. Now you may say, Ravi, that is, a novel. That's the way they live. That even though they propagate one philosophy, they end up living another one, and they find out it is incoherent. Let me read for you something that will absolutely startle you by a philosopher. This was quoted in the Houston Post of July 27, 1991, under the section called Religion and Ethics. It is from a journalist called George Cornell. The headline article reads, "Philosopher says world desperately needs a noble lie." The world desperately needs a noble lie. Listen to the article. Please let me read it in its entirety. This will tell you the unabashed seduction of secular thought, which knows, having abandoned reason, existentially life becomes unlivable. How are they going to solve the dilemma? Listen to this. Religious philosopher Loyal D. Rue says that modern culture urgently needs a noble lie. A myth that links the moral teachings of religion with the scientific facts of life. He said science has eroded the plausibility of the Judeo-Christian myths. It has got into our heads and consciousness in such a way that the traditional myths can't be swallowed anymore. The myths, he said, include archaic views of the universe, a presumption that humans are at the center of the existence, and the stories of Jesus' resurrection and of Moses bringing down the 10 Commandments down from a mountain. These are pure myths, he says. Dispel the myths of religion, he said, and all that is left is despair, which considers life and the universe meaningless. You see what he's saying? You've got to get rid of these myths, but when you get rid of these myths, it leaves you completely desperate. The myths served as a framework for religious teachings that brought about man's betterment, Rue says. Without their integration of cosmology and morality, of cosmic facts with idealism, people will deny fixed standards and do whatever they choose, splintering society. Or they might embrace the totalitarian option which relies on government to force humans to behave, he said. Rue, 46, get this now, a professor of religion and philosophy at Luther College in Iowa, presented his thesis at a recent symposium of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Washington. A church-going but skeptical Lutheran, Rue suggests that we start all over again and create a new myth, a noble lie that squares with what is known scientifically, something that is convincing, though it may not be factual. What would that lie be? He doesn't specify. It remains for the artists, the poets, the novelists, the musicians, the filmmakers, the tricksters, and the masters of illusion to winch us toward our salvation by seducing us into embracing a noble lie, he told the scientific meeting. Perhaps, he said in an interview, it is possible to rework, transpose the Judeo-Christian tradition to make it plausible again. In any case, the illusion must be so imaginative and so compelling that it can't be resisted, so beautiful and satisfying that all will feel they have to accept it, he told the meeting. What I mean by the noble lie is one that deceives us, tricks us, compels us beyond self-interest, beyond ego, beyond family, nation, or race, that will deceive us into the view that our moral discourse must serve the interests not only of ourselves and of each other, but of those of the earth as well. You see what he's saying? That science cannot give you a morality anymore. Reason cannot come to grips with this. How then do we make sense out of living? He said, build a lie. Create a noble lie. Something beautiful, maybe like a Dorian Gray. What he is positing here is that there is an existential breakdown, and they do not know how to deal with the fact that God and God alone as a transcendent being, gives us the point of objective existence of moral reality. You take away the transcendent ethic, and it is all up for grabs. You do what you feel is right, I do what I feel is right. Rousseau says that'll never work. It'll ultimately end up with a totalitarian regime where the government tells us what to do. He says, therefore, to keep us from totalitarianism, let us fabricate a lie so we'll think right and wrong are realities, even though we know, in fact, they're not. You know, this passes off for academic sophistication these days. What are the struggles they have? Why do they feel they need to come up with a lie? Let me deal with 4 struggles that secularism can't deal with, because reality smacks them with existence every step of the way. I think you'll be intrigued by how convincing something like this can be. First is what I call the mystery of human wickedness. The mystery of human wickedness. Do you know what is the most popular subject on the university campus today that philosophers are writing about? They're writing about evil. They cannot explain it anymore. The latest book has come out by Andrew Delbanco, professor at Columbia University, and it is entitled The Death of Satan, How Americans Have Lost the Sense of Evil. A few weeks ago, the New York Times magazine had a very profound article. I'll refer to it later. Possibly the most profound article I have ever seen by a secular man, asking the question, what has happened to us as a culture? Why are we doing the things that we are doing? What has gone wrong with Western life the way we are experiencing it now? But listen to what Professor Delbanco says in the introduction of his book. Once upon a time, evil was personified. Evil was Mephistopheles or the devil, colorfully costumed, almost flavorful, altogether identifiable as a clarified being from another world. But in the industrial system, evil has become systematized. The production of it has become technologized, internationalized, and multinationalized, and especially in times of war and high zealotry, officially rhapsodized. Just as industrialism has radically altered the ways and means of making and distributing, it has also altered the moral structure within which we live. Yet malefactors are harder to spot. They no longer boast horns and wear suits with tails, but rather three-piece suits and sometimes turtleneck sweaters of cashmere wool or magenta blouses of tailored silk. See what he's saying? We've lost this point of reference for Satan. It's a fascinating book, but it's too esoteric, goes into philosophical argumentation. Let me therefore bring you to Ron Rosenbaum's article in the New York Times, because you'll be able to understand the rigors where you and I are. I relate more to this. Listen to what he says. He begins his article. There's a picture of flames out in the beginning, and he talks about it as the mystery of wickedness. He says, what does it take to make a Susan Smith? How can you explain a mother who takes 2 little children, her boy Michael 3 years old and Alex 14 months old, puts them in their safety seats, when with ironic treachery buckles them in for their safety's sake, as these little faces are looking into the eyes of their mother because they're being secured for their safety by her, unknowing in their innocent little minds that there's a scheme going on in her mind, not to protect them, but to so strap them in that neither of them would ever be able to float to the top, and then send that car into the waters and watch 2 of her own offspring go into a watery grave. And then go out and meet with people and cry and describe somebody who has taken them away. And then go into the church and call a pastor alone and spend hours with him in prayer that the killer will be found, that somehow this man who took her children out of her arms will be tracked down. I well remember sitting in the plane. I was leaving for London that night and watching this on the screen, and the artist's conception of what this killer must have looked, this one who had kidnapped her children must look like. And the whole nation was gravitating to one point: will somebody help us get Michael and Alex back? And Rosenbaum says, what happens in the mind of a young Susan Smith? What happens, he says, in the mind of a Jeffrey Dahmer, who goes and is not just content to savagely kill somebody who's gone out with for the night, but then end up cannibalizing them in such a dastardly act? What happens to the Menendez brothers, who bring their mom and dad literally to their knees, fill the father full of lead till he is murdered at the hands of his sons. And the mother is still gasping and panting, literally crawling on all fours, says Rosenbaum, crawling in her blood, desperately trying to get away, when one of the boys goes out, reloads, and comes back and in cold blood finishes the mother off, and then goes out, gets the money to buy a flashy new car. What happens, he says? He phoned ex-Governor Mario Cuomo, phoned philosopher Alvin Plantinga from Notre Dame, talked to some of the best of minds, and says, I want to understand the mystery of evil. And until I understand the mystery of evil, life is going to make no sense for me. What is it? They've lost the objective point of reference. Life now doesn't fit. What does evil really mean? I think this is the point at which even university students sit up and take note, because they see it happening. They see it in our stages and our screens and in real lives where this abandonment and the violence takes place. Now, the Bible is very clear. Notice how the Apostle Paul says it, and I'll read that Romans 1 passage, I'll read it from the J.B. Phillips translation. His English is so masterful here. Listen to what he says. Now the holy anger of God is disclosed from heaven against the godlessness and evil of those men who render truth dumb and impotent by their wickedness. It is not that they do not know the truth about God. Indeed, he has made it quite plain to them. For since the beginning of the world, the invisible attributes of God, example, his eternal power and deity, have been plainly discerned through things which he has made, which are commonly seen and known, thus leaving these men without a rag of excuse. They know all the time that there is a God, yet they refuse to acknowledge him as such or to thank him for what he is or does. Thus they became fatuous in their argumentations and plunged their silly minds still further into the dark. Behind a facade of wisdom, they became just fools who would exchange the glory of the immortal God for an image of a mortal man or of creatures that run or fly or crawl. And he goes on to describe the catalog of sins. Now, I want to position this as best as I have understood it in the scriptures. If I were trying to answer Rosenbaum, I think I would at least start with one simple fact and link it then in the Genesis account. Here it is. Follow me, please. When God created man, the first humans, as he created them, please listen now, he spoke to Adam. He spoke to Eve. He has revealed that speaking in his word. These are not just some concepts floating around in some ethereal substance out there, as it were. He has spoken. He has described creation as good, and he has revealed his character to them. Something very fascinating happens in Genesis 2:19, which I think is definitive of what is going to happen after that. God watches and observes when Adam is doing something now as an under-sovereign. He is naming the other creatures. Remember that incident in the scriptures? He is naming them. And when God saw him naming them, the Bible says God was pleased. But he knew he needed a helpmate, and then created Eve. Now, in the process of the beginning, God has spoken. Now, Adam has spoken, and circumscription is being given to reality. There is a naming going on. Now, all of a sudden, what happens is, when that seduction takes place, evil comes in, and here's what I believe takes place. When God gives Adam and Eve that challenge, do all of this, and you shall live. But in the day that you shall eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall surely die. Implicit in that plea for God, from God, to ask Adam and Eve what to do was this simple statement: trust me. Trust me. Don't touch that tree. Believe me. You see what's happened? He's defined reality. Adam has defined the reality as he knew it. Now God gives him a circumscription and says, this is as far you can go. Please trust me. When they fell, what happened? They chose to call God a liar. And she says, Satan deceived me. Satan deceived me. You know what wickedness is? Wickedness is governing your life by a starting point of a lie. that you can define good and evil apart from God. That's what Satan said. Why don't you be as gods? In the day you eat of this, if you'll open your eyes and you shall be as God, knowing good and evil. What he's really saying is you can define good and evil after that. This is so pivotal, and I think if it dawns into the mind, to me it was very liberating to understand this, because I've known the lies by which I have been tempted to live sometimes. I've known the lies by which humanity can be so sucked in. The lie that tells you stolen waters can be sweet when they are bitter. The lies that tell you you can take the law into your own hands and kill somebody when it is not so. The lie that Susan Smith believed that her problem was that her children were in the way. The lie that told Jeffrey Dahmer he can put these bodies into his freezer and consume them with impunity. The lies that the Menendez boys believed that they could kill their father and mother and somehow blame society for it. If you look at what had happened to Adam and Eve, the outside temptation came and lured them. So says Eve, I was deceived. But you go to Noah's time, it is a pristine world all over again. He was a godly man. Eve took of the fruit of the tree. Noah took of the fruit of the vine. And now all of a sudden he's in his drunkenness, and his son comes and sees him naked, brings his brothers to that scene. All of a sudden you find out you didn't need Satan crawling out there anymore trying to allure you. You didn't need Basil Hallward from my outside telling you to repent. Your conscience from within was going to also be a struggling factor to you. And what happened was two things emerged from within that episode. Both in Adam and Eve and in Noah's case, two things happened. Violence came into the household, and the body became abused in sexuality. And the families were split immediately after that. Something that ties this all together is very pivotal right now. So God describes reality. Adam as an underagent defines reality. They choose to make God a liar. When you go to Genesis chapter 10 and 11, remember the Tower of Babel is being built? Again, another definitive passage. And here's what happens then. He says, let us go down, because men said, let us make a name for ourselves. Adam had earlier on named the animal kingdom, as it were. Now people are saying, let us make a name for ourselves. You know what they're saying? Let's redefine reality. Where we're right at the top. Let's redefine reality, where we're right at the top. God says, let's go down and confuse their languages, because if they speak the same language, they will redefine everything, and everything good will become evil, everything evil will become good. God confused the languages to keep us from speaking the same language, because what is inside will sooner or later come out on the outside. We will reconstruct language because we are trying to deal with reality and call what is true a lie, and calling that which is a lie, making it to be the truth. Follow what I'm saying? Language has everything to do with how you perceive reality. So what God calls good, let us not call evil. And what God calls evil, let us not call good. If you allow me to put it this way, please bear with me. I wouldn't do it except to make it relevant for our language. We read, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Let us put it into our context, because logos was more meaningful for the Greek than it would be for you and me. In the beginning was the definition, and the definition was God. And the definition became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. God defines what is real. That which God has put together as reality, let no man put asunder. Look at your life now. What lies are you living with? What lies are you convincing yourself that you can alter and that it won't work out falsely? You struggle with it, I struggle with it. And ladies and gentlemen, why have we come up with statements like politically correct? And please forgive me, because I don't like to address these issues as point blank on campuses, I don't. Why do we use words like homophobic? Why do we use words like pro-choice?